The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the black pearl necklace that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Today was different from any other day in her life as a royal. Today she would say goodbye to the life she had known for over a decade. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. His face carried the weight of a decision that had taken months to reach. The Prince of Wales had always been a man of duty, but recent events had pushed him to a breaking point that few could understand. "Are you ready, darling?" he asked softly, placing his hands on her shoulders. Catherine met his eyes in the mirror's reflection, seeing the same mixture of sadness and determination that had been there for weeks. The decision hadn't come lightly. For months, William and Catherine had watched as their children faced increasing scrutiny from the media. George, Charlotte, and Louis had begun asking questions that no parent should have to answer. Why couldn't they play in the garden without photographers hiding in the bushes? Why did strangers shout their names on the street? Why did their friends at school sometimes act differently around them? The final straw had come just 3 weeks earlier. 10-year-old George had come home from school with tears in his eyes, asking his mother why a magazine had printed pictures of him eating lunch. The photographer had somehow gotten onto the school grounds, violating what should have been a safe space for the young prince. That night, William had paced their private sitting room for hours. Catherine had watched her husband struggle with a choice between his birthright and his family's well-being. The crown had given them privilege and purpose, but it had also taken away something precious: their children's chance at a normal childhood. "I can't do this anymore. Catherine," William had said that night, his voice breaking, "I look at George and I see myself at his age. I remember the cameras, the constant attention, the way people looked at me after my mother died. I won't put our children through that." Catherine had understood immediately. She had seen the toll that royal life could take, not just on William but on anyone who entered their world. She thought of Diana, whose memory still haunted the corridors of every royal residence. She thought of Harry, who had chosen a different path, and the family rifts that decision had created. The conversation with King Charles had been one of the most difficult of William's life. His father, now in his 70s and having waited decades to wear the crown, couldn't hide his disappointment. The line of succession would pass to George when the time came, but that seemed like a cruel burden to place on a child who just wanted to play football and build Lego castles. "You're breaking 1,000 years of tradition," Charles had said, his voice heavy with emotion. "And I'm saving my family," William had replied. The formal announcement would come later that morning. The palace's communications team had worked for weeks to craft a statement that would explain their decision without creating a constitutional crisis. William would remain in the line of succession, but he would step back from all royal duties. They would keep their titles but not their roles. As Catherine finished getting ready, she thought about the letters she had written the night before. Personal notes to the charities she had supported, the organizations that had become like family to her. The mental health initiatives, the early childhood development programs, the causes that had given meaning to her royal role. All of it would have to continue without her direct involvement. William was saying his own private goodbyes. He had spent the early morning walking through the castle grounds, touching the stone walls that had housed his ancestors for generations. This wasn't just about leaving a job, it was about walking away from centuries of family history. Their children were still asleep, unaware that when they woke up their lives would change forever. William and Catherine had decided to tell them together, to explain that they were choosing a different kind of life. A life where Daddy wouldn't have to travel so much for work, where Mommy could pick them up from school without it becoming a news event. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. By leaving the royal family to protect their privacy, they were generating more media attention than they had in years. But this would be temporary. Once the initial shock wore off, once they established new lives away from the spotlight, they hoped to find the peace they were seeking. Catherine picked up a small photograph from her dressing table, a candid shot of their family during a private vacation the previous summer. All 5 of them were laughing at something Louis had said, their faces relaxed and genuinely happy. No photographers, no protocol, no careful poses for the public, just a family being a family. "This is why we're doing this," she whispered to herself, tucking the photograph into her handbag. William checked his watch. In 2 hours, their private secretary would release the statement to the press. By evening, their decision would be headline news around the world. There would be criticism, they knew. People would call them selfish, ungrateful, irresponsible. But there would also be understanding from parents who recognized their struggle. As they prepared to leave their suite, Catherine took one last look around the room that had been their sanctuary. The antique furniture, the family portraits, the view of the gardens where they had watched their children take their first steps, all of it would become memory. William offered her his arm, and together they walked toward the door. Outside, their protection officers waited, still on duty for a few more hours. The children would wake soon, and then would come the conversation that would change everything. No regrets? William asked as they reached the threshold. Catherine looked at her husband, thinking of the university student who had captured her heart so many years ago. Before the titles, before the duties, before the weight of the crown had settled on their shoulders? None, she said firmly. We're choosing love over legacy. Our children will thank us someday. The morning sun continued its climb across the sky, marking the beginning of their last day as working members of the British royal family. The children's laughter echoed through the breakfast room as Louis tried to balance a piece of toast on his nose, much to Charlotte's delight. George sat quietly reading a book about space exploration while eating his cereal. For a moment, watching her children being simply children, Catherine felt her heart ache with the rightness of their decision. William entered the room carrying his morning tea, and the children immediately sensed something different. Parents develop a certain energy when they have important news, and children are remarkably good at detecting it. "Mummy, Daddy, why do you both look serious?" Charlotte asked, her 8-year-old intuition sharp as always. Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had practiced this conversation, but now, faced with 3 pairs of innocent eyes, the words felt inadequate. "We need to talk to you all about something important," William began, settling into his chair. "You know how sometimes we have to go to events and meetings because of our royal duties?" The children nodded. They understood that their parents had special jobs, though the full weight of those responsibilities was still beyond their comprehension. "Well," Catherine continued gently, "Daddy and I have decided that we want to spend more time with you 3. We want to be a normal family." "What does that mean?" George asked, closing his book and giving them his full attention. William took a deep breath. "It means we're going to step away from being working royals. We'll still be a family that loves each other very much, but things are going to change." Louis, at 5 years old, was more concerned with immediate practicalities. "Does that mean no more fancy cars?" Despite the gravity of the moment, William couldn't help but smile. "We'll still have cars, buddy. Just maybe not quite so fancy." Charlotte, ever the thoughtful one, asked the question her parents had been dreading. "Are people going to be angry with us?" Catherine knelt beside her daughter's chair, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Some people might not understand at first, but the people who really love us will support our choice, and the most important thing is that we'll be together more." The announcement had been released just an hour earlier, and already their private secretary was fielding hundreds of calls. The statement was simple but unprecedented. Their Royal Highnesses the Prince and Princess of Wales have made the difficult decision to step back from their roles as working members of the royal family to focus on their young family's well-being and privacy. They will retain their titles but will no longer carry out official engagements on behalf of the crown. Social media had exploded within minutes. The hashtags Your William and Kate and Royal Exit were trending worldwide. News channels were scrambling to put together special reports. Royal correspondents were analyzing every word of the statement, and the general public was divided between shock, support, and criticism. In the breakfast room, however, the world's reaction felt distant. George asked practical questions about school. Would he still go to the same one? Would his friends treat him differently? William assured him that they would try to keep as much of their routine the same as possible. "The biggest change," Catherine explained, "is that we won't have to do as many public events. I won't have to travel as much for work, and Daddy won't either. We can have more family dinners, more bedtime stories, more ordinary weekends." Charlotte perked up at this. "Does this mean we can get a dog?" The question caught both parents off guard, and they burst into laughter. Trust Charlotte to find the silver lining in any situation. "We'll think about the dog," William promised, ruffling his daughter's hair. As the morning progressed, The children adapted to the news with the resilience that only the young possess. They seemed more excited about the prospect of having their parents around more than concerned about the implications of their decision. Catherine spent the afternoon making phone calls to close friends and family members. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, were supportive but worried about the public backlash. Her sister Pippa was relieved, having watched Catherine struggle with the balance between public duty and private life for years. "I'm proud of you," Carol had said over the phone. "You're putting your children first, and that's what any good mother would do." William had the more difficult conversations. His brother Harry called from California, and their discussion was both supportive and bittersweet. Harry understood better than anyone the weight of royal duty and the price it extracted from family life. "I wish I'd had your courage when my children were younger," Harry admitted, "but I also know how hard this must be for you." The conversation with his grandmother, the Queen Mother, was perhaps the most emotional. At 93, she had lived through decades of royal duty and understood both the burden and the privilege it represented. "Your great-grandmother would have understood," she told William. "She always said that the crown should serve the family, not the other way around. You're doing what's right for your children." By afternoon, the family's protection team had briefed them on the increased security measures that would be temporarily necessary. The media attention would be intense for several weeks, possibly months. Photographers would try to capture their first pictures as former working royals, and every public appearance would be scrutinized. Catherine stood in the garden, watching Louis chase butterflies while George and Charlotte played on the swing set William had installed the previous summer. The normalcy of the scene felt precious and fragile. Soon this kind of spontaneous outdoor play might be impossible for a while. Her phone buzzed with a text from her close friend Sophie, who had children the same age. "The school gates are swarming with photographers. Want me to pick up the kids tomorrow?" This was the reality they would face in the coming weeks. Simple tasks like school pickup would become complicated by media attention, but Catherine was determined to maintain as much normalcy as possible for her children. William found her in the garden as the sun began to set. The children were inside with their nanny, probably watching cartoons and pretending this was just another ordinary day. "Any regrets yet?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Catherine leaned back against him, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky pink and gold. "Just one," she said softly. William tensed, worried that she might be having second thoughts. "I regret that it took us this long to make this decision," she continued. "I think about all the bedtime stories we missed, all the school plays we had to leave early, all the family dinners interrupted by duty calls. We can't get that time back." Relief flooded through William. "But we can make sure we don't miss any more." As night fell over Windsor, the family gathered in the sitting room for what had become their favorite tradition, story time. William read from a book about a family of bears who went on adventures together, while Catherine curled up on the sofa with Louis in her lap and Charlotte leaning against her side. George sat on the floor, still fascinated by the pictures even though he could read the words himself. Outside, the world debated their choice. Inside, they were simply a family spending an evening together. And for the first time in years, they didn't have to rush off to another engagement or prepare for another public appearance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were exactly where they belonged. 3 days after the announcement, Catherine stood at the kitchen window of Anmer Hall, their country retreat in Norfolk, watching William teach Louis how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. The scene was beautifully ordinary, a father running alongside his 5-year-old son, offering encouragement and catching him when he wobbled. "I did it, Daddy." "I did it," Louis shouted as he managed to pedal several feet on his own. "You're amazing, buddy," William called back, his face lit with pure joy. Catherine smiled, remembering how many official engagements William had missed moments like this for. Last month alone, he had been in Scotland for a climate summit when Charlotte lost her first tooth, and in Wales opening a hospital when George scored his first goal in a school football match. The media storm was still raging, but they had made the decision to retreat to Norfolk until the initial frenzy died down. The house offered them 20 acres of privacy, surrounded by the Sandringham estate, where William had spent countless childhood holidays with his own father and grandparents. George emerged from the house carrying a stack of books, settling on the garden bench to read in the afternoon sun. At 10, he was becoming increasingly aware of the attention their family attracted, and Catherine had noticed him becoming more withdrawn in public situations. "Mum," he said, looking up from his book, "Emma's mom asked her to ask me if we're going to move to America like Uncle Harry did." Catherine sat beside her eldest son, considering her words carefully. The children's friends and their parents were naturally curious, and she knew George was fielding questions at school that no 10-year-old should have to handle. "What did you tell Emma?" she asked. "I said I didn't know, but I hope not because I like my room here," George replied honestly. "We're not moving to America, sweetheart," Catherine assured him. "We're staying right here in England. This is our home, and it always will be." The truth was more complicated. While they wouldn't be working royals, they would still need to maintain their security and privacy. The cottage in Norfolk was perfect for now, but they were also looking at properties that might offer them a more permanent base away from the constant scrutiny of Windsor. Charlotte came running around the corner, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mummy, Daddy taught me how to do cartwheels. Want to see?" For the next 10 minutes, Catherine was treated to an enthusiastic demonstration of Charlotte's new skill, complete with commentary from George about proper cartwheel technique and encouragement from Louis, who had abandoned his bicycle to watch his sister. These were the moments Catherine realized that they had been missing. Not the grand gestures or official ceremonies, but the small, everyday miracles of watching their children discover the world. Her phone buzzed with a message from their former private secretary. "Palace wants to discuss transition timeline. Also 17 interview requests from international media." Catherine turned the phone face down. Those conversations could wait. Right now, her daughter was performing cartwheels in the garden, and that was infinitely more important than any media interview. William jogged over, slightly out of breath from his bicycle running duties. "How's our gymnast doing?" he asked, just as Charlotte attempted an ambitious cartwheel that ended with her tumbling into the grass. Giggling. "I think she needs a bit more practice," Catherine laughed. That evening, after the children were in bed, Catherine and William sat on their back terrace with cups of tea, watching the stars appear in the clear Norfolk sky. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the distant sound of owls and the rustle of wind through the trees. "I had a call from my father today," William said quietly. Catherine waited, knowing that conversations with King Charles were often complicated, especially now. "He's still struggling with our decision, but he wanted me to know that he's proud of us for putting the children first." William continued. "He said he regretted not being able to make the same choice when Harry and I were young." The admission touched Catherine deeply. Charles had been bound by different expectations, different times. The idea of stepping back from royal duty had been unthinkable during his era as heir. "He also said something interesting," William added. "He thinks our decision might actually strengthen the monarchy in the long run, show that it can evolve, that it can prioritize human values over rigid tradition." Catherine considered this. "Do you think he's right?" "Maybe," William said. "Or maybe we're just two parents who got tired of explaining to our children why strangers wanted to take their pictures while they ate ice cream." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The past few days had been emotionally exhausting, but also liberating. For the first time in over a decade, their schedule was their own. "I got a letter today," Catherine said eventually, "from a mother in Leeds whose son has autism. She said our decision to prioritize our children's well-being had given her courage to make some changes in her own life, to stop feeling guilty about putting her family's needs first." William reached for her hand. "We're getting a lot of letters like that, aren't we?" "Hundreds," Catherine confirmed. People sharing their own stories about choosing family over career expectations, or stepping back from situations that weren't healthy for their children. It's incredible how many parents are struggling with similar choices. The next morning brought news that would test their resolve. A major newspaper had published photos of George at school, taken with a long-range camera from outside the school grounds. The pictures showed their son looking uncomfortable and withdrawn, clearly aware he was being photographed. William's reaction was immediate and fierce. "This is exactly why we made this decision," he said, pacing their kitchen. "This is what I lived with as a child, and I won't accept it for our children." Catherine was already on the phone with their legal team. The school had strict policies about photography, and the newspaper had clearly violated those boundaries. But the damage was done. Their 10-year-old son had been turned into a news story simply for attending school. "We need to make a statement," Catherine said after ending her call. "Not through the palace, but directly from us. We need to set clear boundaries about the children." That afternoon, they released a personal statement that was both firm and heartfelt. "As parents, our primary concern is the well-being and privacy of our children. While we understand public interest in our family, we ask that our children's right to a normal childhood be respected. Photography of them without consent, particularly at school or during private family time, is unacceptable and will be met with legal action." The response was mixed but largely supportive. Many parents, both famous and unknown, shared their own experiences of trying to protect their children from unwanted attention. That evening, as Catherine tucked George into bed, he asked the question she had been dreading. "Mom, why do people want to take pictures of me when I'm just trying to eat my lunch?" Catherine sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his hair. "Because sometimes, when people are curious about someone, they forget that person might want privacy. But you don't need to worry about that anymore, sweetheart. Daddy and I are going to make sure you can just be a regular kid. Promise?" George asked, his young face serious. "Promise," Catherine said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. As she turned off his light and closed his door, Catherine knew they had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever criticism they faced, they were protecting something precious and irreplaceable: their children's right to simply be children. 2 weeks into their new life, Catherine found herself in the most ordinary of places, the queue at the local supermarket in King's Lynn. Charlotte held her hand while Louis insisted on pushing their own small trolley, bumping into displays with 5-year-old enthusiasm. George walked beside them, still adjusting to the novelty of shopping without security officers maintaining a perimeter. The other shoppers were respectfully curious but kind. A few offered gentle smiles of recognition, but most simply went about their business. It was exactly the kind of normal interaction Catherine had hoped for. "Mummy, can we get the biscuits with the chocolate chips?" Louis asked, pointing to a colorful package. "Just this once," Catherine agreed, and Louis's face lit up as if she'd granted him the greatest treasure in the world. At the checkout, the elderly cashier looked up with a warm smile. "Lovely children," she said simply. "You're doing the right thing, dear." The words, spoken without fanfare or drama, meant more to Catherine than any official statement of support ever could. Back at Anmer Hall, William was in the garden with the estate agent, discussing potential modifications to make the property more suitable as a permanent family home. They had decided to make Norfolk their primary residence. Away from the intense London scrutiny but still close enough to family when needed. The stables could be converted into a proper office space, the agent was suggesting. Somewhere you could work from home when necessary. William nodded, though the concept of work was still being defined. He and Catherine had established a small foundation focused on mental health support for families, particularly those dealing with unwanted media attention. It wouldn't be royal patronage in the traditional sense, but it would allow them to continue meaningful work on their own terms. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Princess Anne's Range Rover pulled up the drive, and William's aunt emerged with her characteristic no-nonsense efficiency. "Thought I'd check on you all," Anne said, accepting Catherine's offer of tea. "See how you're settling into civilian life." Princess Anne had always been one of the most hard-working royals, maintaining a schedule that would exhaust people half her age. But she also understood the pressure that came with duty, having raised her own children in the public eye. "Any regrets?" she asked William directly, settling into an armchair with her tea. "None about leaving," William replied honestly. "Some about how long it took us to make the decision." Anne nodded approvingly. "Your mother would have been proud," she said quietly. She always worried about the effect of royal life on children. She would have understood completely. The mention of Diana brought a moment of quiet reflection. Catherine had often wondered what advice her late mother-in-law might have given about balancing royal duty with family life. "The institution will survive," Anne continued pragmatically. "It survived abdications, divorces, scandals, and wars. 2 people choosing to prioritize their children won't break it. If anything, it might make it stronger." The children burst through the garden doors at that moment, having spotted their great-aunt's arrival. Anne's face softened immediately. She had always had a special relationship with William and Harry's children. "Uncle Anne," Louis shouted, using the family nickname that had stuck since he first tried to say her name. "Hello, troublemaker," Anne replied, opening her arms as Louis launched himself into her lap. George and Charlotte were more reserved, but equally pleased to see her. Anne had a gift for treating children as individuals rather than just members of the royal family, something they all appreciated. "Are you really not going to be Prince and Princess anymore?" Charlotte asked with 8-year-old directness. "We'll always be Prince and Princess," Catherine explained. "Those are our titles. But we won't have the same job anymore. What job will you have instead?" George wanted to know. William and Catherine exchanged glances. They had been discussing this very question extensively. "We're going to help other families," William said simply. "Families who need support when life gets difficult." Anne stayed for dinner, and the evening took on the quality of an ordinary family gathering. The children showed off their various talents: George's latest Lego creation, Charlotte's cartwheels, Louis's ability to recite the alphabet backward. Anne listened with genuine interest, offering praise and asking thoughtful questions. After the children were in bed, the adults sat in the sitting room with glasses of wine, and the conversation turned more serious. "The palace is handling the transition well," Anne reported. "Your father is adjusting to the new arrangement. The younger royals are stepping up to fill the gaps in the schedule." "How's the public reaction?" Catherine asked. "Mixed, as expected," Anne replied honestly, "but more supportive than critical, particularly among parents. There's a growing understanding that royal children deserve some protection from media scrutiny." She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. "There's something else you should know. Several other European royal families are watching your situation with interest. There's a growing conversation about modernizing royal roles, making them more flexible and family-friendly." This surprised both William and Catherine. They hadn't considered that their decision might have implications beyond their own family. "Change is coming whether we like it or not," Anne continued. "The next generation expects different things from public figures, including royals. Your choice might be ahead of its time, but it won't be unique for long." The next morning brought a letter that would change their perspective entirely. It was from a charity that supported military families, written by a woman whose husband had served multiple tours in Afghanistan. "Your decision to step back from royal duties to focus on your family has given me courage to ask my husband to consider leaving the military," the letter read. "For years I've felt selfish for wanting him home more, for wanting our children to have their father present. Your example has shown me that choosing family isn't selfish, it's necessary." Catherine read the letter aloud to William as they sat in their kitchen with morning coffee. By the time she finished, both of them had tears in their eyes. "We're not just making a choice for our family," William realized. "We're making a statement about what matters most." Catherine nodded, thinking of all the letters and messages they had received from parents facing similar struggles. "Maybe that's our real purpose now. Not representing an institution, but representing the right of parents to put their children first." That afternoon, William played football in the garden with George and Charlotte, while Catherine pushed Louis on the swing. The scene was beautifully normal. A father and his children enjoying a sunny afternoon together. No schedules to keep. No photographers to avoid. Louis jumped off the swing and ran to where Catherine sat on the garden bench. "Mummy," he said, climbing onto her lap, "I like it better when you and Daddy don't have to go to work all the time." Catherine held her youngest son close, breathing in the scent of his hair and the sweetness of the moment. "Me too, sweetheart," she whispered. "Me too." As evening approached and the children reluctantly came inside for baths and dinner, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. They had given up titles and duties and centuries of tradition, but they had gained something infinitely more valuable: the simple joy of being present for their children's childhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new adjustments. But tonight, as she helped Louis brush his teeth and listened to Charlotte's elaborate bedtime story about a princess who gave up her crown to become a regular mummy, Catherine knew they had made the right choice. 6 months had passed since their announcement, and Catherine was surprised by how naturally they had settled into their new rhythm of life. She stood in the kitchen of their renovated Norfolk home, packing school lunches while listening to the familiar morning chaos of 3 children getting ready for the day. "Mom, I can't find my football boots," George called from upstairs. "Try under your bed." She called back, spreading jam on Charlotte's sandwich. They're not there. Did you look in the boot room? William suggested, appearing in the kitchen with Louis perched on his shoulders, both of them already dressed for the day. The boot room search proved successful, and soon all three children were eating breakfast around the kitchen table, a scene that had become precious in its ordinariness. No rushing off to early morning engagements. No need to be camera ready before dawn. Mrs. Thompson wants to know if you can help with the school fete next month, Charlotte announced between bites of toast. Catherine smiled. Mrs. Thompson was Charlotte's teacher, and the request was wonderfully normal. What kind of help does she need? She wants you to run the cake stall, Charlotte replied importantly. But I told her you're not very good at baking. William nearly choked on his coffee while Catherine tried to look offended. I'm perfectly adequate at baking, thank you very much. Remember the birthday cake that sank in the middle? George added helpfully. That was one time, Catherine protested, but she was laughing. These were the kinds of family conversations she had missed during their years of packed royal schedules. After the children left for school, dropped off by William in their decidedly non-royal family car, Catherine settled in her small office to review applications for their new foundation. They had quietly launched the Family First Foundation 3 months earlier, focusing on supporting families dealing with media intrusion and helping parents make difficult choices between career and family demands. The response had been overwhelming. They were receiving requests for help from military families, diplomatic families, and even families of celebrities who were struggling to protect their children's privacy while maintaining public careers. One application particularly caught Catherine's attention. A foreign correspondent was asking for advice on how to maintain family stability while covering international stories. She had 3 young children and was torn between her passion for journalism and her desire to be present for her family. Catherine made a note to schedule a video call with the woman. These were exactly the kinds of situations their foundation was designed to address. Not with money, but with guidance, support, and the reassurance that putting family first wasn't a failure, but a courageous choice. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. School called. Louis has been chosen to be a sheep in the nativity play. We need to make a sheep costume. Catherine laughed out loud. Last year she would have delegated costume making to palace staff. This year she was looking forward to the challenge of creating a convincing sheep outfit with her own hands. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A car pulled up their drive, and Catherine was surprised to see her former private secretary, Rebecca, stepping out. Rebecca, what a lovely surprise, Catherine greeted her warmly. Rebecca had been instrumental in managing their transition away from royal duties and had become a trusted friend. I hope you don't mind me dropping by, Rebecca said, accepting Catherine's offer of tea. I was in the area, and I have some news I thought you'd want to hear in person. They settled in the sitting room, and Rebecca's expression grew serious. The palace has been monitoring public reaction to your decision over the past 6 months, she began. The polling numbers are remarkable, Catherine. 73% of parents support your choice, and even among non-parents, the majority understand your reasoning. Catherine felt a wave of relief. The criticism had been intense initially, particularly from traditionalists who felt they had abandoned their duty. There's more, Rebecca continued. 3 other European royal families have contacted the palace asking for advice on implementing more flexible royal roles. Your decision has started a conversation about modernizing monarchy that's happening across Europe. This was unexpected news. Catherine and William had made their choice for purely personal reasons, but it seemed to be having broader implications. The most interesting development, Rebecca added, is that several companies have reached out wanting to know if you'd consider consulting work, helping them develop family-friendly policies for high-pressure careers. Catherine considered this carefully. It could be a way to turn their personal experience into something that helped other families facing similar challenges. When William returned from collecting the children, Rebecca shared the same news with him. His reaction was thoughtful. We never intended to start a movement, he said, but if our choice helps other families, then perhaps it's serving a purpose beyond our own circumstances. That evening, after Rebecca had left and the children were in bed, William and Catherine sat in their garden watching the sunset. The peace of their Norfolk home felt like a luxury they would never take for granted. Do you think we should take on the consulting work? Catherine asked. William was quiet for a moment, considering. Only if we can do it on our terms. The whole point was to have more control over our time and priorities. Limited engagements, Catherine agreed. Maybe one company per quarter, and only if their values align with ours. They spent the next hour discussing possibilities, but their conversation was interrupted by Charlotte appearing in the doorway in her pajamas. I had a bad dream, she said quietly. Without hesitation, Catherine opened her arms and Charlotte climbed onto her lap. A year ago, Catherine might have been preparing for an evening engagement unavailable for midnight comfort sessions. Now there was nowhere else she needed to be. Want to tell me about the dream? Catherine asked softly. I dreamed that you and Daddy had to go back to being working royals and we couldn't be a normal family anymore, Charlotte confessed. William moved to sit beside them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. That's not going to happen, sweetheart. We made a promise to you and George and Louis, remember? But what if the Queen needs you back? Charlotte persisted with 8-year-old logic. Grandpa Charles has lots of other people to help him, William explained patiently, and we're still part of the family. We just don't have the same job anymore. Charlotte seemed satisfied with this explanation and allowed herself to be carried back to bed. As William tucked her in again, she asked sleepily, Daddy, are you happy we're normal now? I'm the happiest I've ever been, William told her truthfully. Back in the garden, Catherine and William reflected on their daughter's fears. The children were still adjusting to their new life, still processing what the changes meant for their family. Sometimes I wonder if we've been selfish, Catherine admitted, taking them away from a heritage that belongs to them. William shook his head firmly. We've given them something more valuable than heritage. We've given them a childhood. George will still be king someday if he chooses to be, but he'll have had the chance to be a child first. The next morning brought news that put their decision into sharp perspective. A paparazzi photographer had been arrested for attempting to break into a school, attended by children of other celebrities. The incident highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by public figures trying to protect their children's privacy. Catherine felt a surge of gratitude for their rural location and the relative peace it provided their family. The local community had embraced them warmly but respectfully, treating them as neighbors rather than curiosities. At the school pickup that afternoon, Catherine chatted with other parents about the upcoming fete, Louis's sheep costume requirements, and George's progress in mathematics. The conversations were beautifully mundane, grounding her in the reality of ordinary parental concerns. How are you finding the adjustment? Asked Sarah, another mother whose children were friends with George and Charlotte. Honestly, it's been wonderful, Catherine replied. I didn't realize how much we were missing until we stepped back. Sarah nodded understandingly. My husband travels a lot for work, and I see how it affects the children when he's away for their important moments. You're brave for making the change. That evening, as Catherine helped Louis practice being a sheep for his nativity rehearsal, she reflected on the word brave. 6 months ago, she would have thought courage meant fulfilling royal duties despite personal cost. Now she understood that sometimes the bravest choice was admitting when something wasn't working and having the strength to change course. Mummy, do sheep make ba sounds or moo sounds? Louis asked seriously. Definitely ba sounds, sweetheart, Catherine replied, trying not to smile at his concentration. Good, because I've been practicing ba all week, Louis announced proudly. These were the moments. Catherine realized that made everything worthwhile. Not the grand gestures or ceremonial occasions, but the quiet daily victories of being present for her children's questions, concerns, and small triumphs. As bedtime approached and the house settled into its evening rhythm, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment. They had traded certainty for choice, tradition for authenticity, and public duty for private joy. It was a bargain she would make again without hesitation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, her family was together under one roof, safe and happy and whole. That was worth more than any crown. 1 year had passed since their announcement, and Catherine stood in the wings of the village hall, watching Louis take his place among the other sheep in the nativity play. His homemade costume, carefully crafted over several evenings with William's help, was slightly lopsided but perfect in its imperfection. That's my boy, William whispered beside her, his phone ready to capture every moment of their 5-year-old's theatrical debut. In the audience, George and Charlotte sat with their grandparents, both the Middletons and King Charles, who had made the journey to Norfolk to watch his grandson's performance. The sight of the King of England squeezed into a small plastic chair in a village hall would have seemed surreal a year ago, but had become wonderfully normal in their new life. The play began, and Louis delivered his single line. "The stable is full," with such enthusiasm that the entire audience burst into delighted laughter. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, not because of the performance itself, but because she was there to witness it. Last year, royal duties would have likely prevented either parent from attending. After the play, as they gathered in the hall for mince pies and tea, Catherine was approached by Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from the village. "Your Royal Highness," she began formally, then caught herself. "Sorry, I mean Catherine, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. "My granddaughter lives in London with my son and his wife. Both parents work demanding jobs, and they've been struggling to balance everything. After hearing about your decision, they had a serious conversation about priorities. My son reduced his hours so he could be home for bedtime stories and school events. Your courage gave them permission to make their family the priority." Stories like Mrs. Henderson's had become common over the past year. Their foundation had received thousands of letters from families who had been inspired to make similar changes. Parents who had negotiated more flexible working arrangements, couples who had turned down promotions that would require extensive travel, families who had chosen smaller homes in order to reduce financial pressure and spend more time together. Later that evening, after the children were exhausted and happy in their beds, William and Catherine sat in their sitting room with King Charles, who had stayed for dinner and bedtime stories. "I owe you both an apology," Charles said quietly, setting down his teacup. "When you first told me about your decision, I thought you were being rash, perhaps selfish. I understand now that you were being wise." William looked surprised. His relationship with his father had always been complex, shaped by duty and expectation rather than simple affection. Watching Louis tonight, seeing how naturally confident he was, how unself-conscious. Charles continued. "George and Charlotte too. They're growing up feeling secure in your love, not performing for public approval. That's a gift I'm not sure I was able to give you and Harry." The admission hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken regret. "You did your best with the tools you had," William said gently. "The institution was different then. The expectations were different." "Perhaps," Charles agreed. "But watching you three tonight, I realized that you found something I spent decades searching for, the balance between service and family. You're still serving, just differently." It was true. Their foundation had grown beyond their initial expectations. They were consulting with 3 companies on family-friendly policies, had advised 2 other royal families on modernizing their approaches to public duty, and were in discussions with a university about establishing a research center focused on family well-being and high-pressure careers. But all of this work was done on their terms, fitting around school schedules and family commitments rather than dominating them. "I have some news," Charles added, his tone shifting to something more official. "The Commonwealth heads of government have asked if you might consider a special ambassadorial role, part-time, family-friendly, focused on youth and family issues." Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had been expecting something like this eventually. "What would it involve?" Catherine asked carefully. 2 or 3 international trips per year, always together, always with the option to bring the children during school holidays," Charles explained. "No fixed schedule, no obligation to accept every invitation. Complete control over your commitments." It was an intriguing offer, a way to maintain some connection to royal service without sacrificing the family life they had fought to protect. "We'll need to think about it," William said diplomatically. "Of course," Charles agreed. "There's no pressure. You've proven that the monarchy can evolve, that duty doesn't have to consume family life. Whether you choose to take on additional roles or not, you've already served the institution well by showing it can adapt." After Charles left, Catherine and William walked through their house, checking on the children one final time. George was fast asleep with a book still in his hands. He had inherited his father's love of reading. Charlotte had arranged her stuffed animals in elaborate scenes from the nativity play, and Louis was curled up in his sheep costume, having refused to take it off for bed. "Are you tempted by the ambassadorial role?" Catherine asked as they reached their own bedroom. "Part of me is," William admitted, "but only if we can truly do it our way. The children come first, always." "Always," Catherine agreed. They had learned, over the past year, that stepping back didn't mean stepping away entirely. Their foundation work had shown them that they could still contribute meaningfully to public life, while maintaining the family priorities that mattered most to them. As Catherine prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had a year ago, more relaxed, more confident in her choices. The constant tension of trying to balance impossible demands had been replaced by the calm that came from clear priorities. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister Pippa. "Saw the photos from Louis's play on your Instagram. He looks so happy and confident. You all do. I'm so proud of you for following your hearts." The Instagram account had been another small rebellion. Candid family photos shared on their own terms, without formal palace approval or professional photographers. It allowed them to control their narrative while still sharing appropriate moments with the public who remained interested in their lives. William emerged from the bathroom, and they settled into bed together. Outside, the Norfolk countryside was quiet except for the distant sound of wind in the trees. "Any regrets?" William asked, echoing the question that had become their touchstone over the past year. Catherine considered carefully. The past year had brought challenges: financial adjustments, security concerns, criticism from traditionalists, and the ongoing work of establishing new routines and boundaries. But it had also brought gifts beyond measure. Louis's unself-conscious joy in his nativity play, George's increasing confidence at school, Charlotte's creative spirit flourishing without the pressure of constant public scrutiny. Family dinners without interruption, bedtime stories every night, lazy Sunday mornings that stretched for hours. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." William smiled, pulling her closer. "Good. Because I love our life." "Our beautifully ordinary, perfectly imperfect life," Catherine agreed. Outside, the stars shone over Norfolk, the same stars that had witnessed centuries of royal history. But inside their modest home, a different kind of history was being written, the story of a family who chose love over legacy, presence over prestige, and discovered that sometimes the most radical act is simply being there for the people who matter most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices, but tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together, at peace, and home. As sleep came, Catherine's last thought was of Louis in his sheep costume, proudly announcing that the stable was full. In their own way, they had found their stable too, a place of shelter and love where their family could grow and flourish, away from the storms of public expectation and duty. It was full, and it was perfect, and it was theirs.